No one ever came to Marcus Hale's garage by accident. The road leading to his workshop was cracked, narrow, and forgotten by the city. Even delivery trucks avoided it. So when Marcus heard a smooth, quiet engine sound cutting through the afternoon heat, his hands froze, mid-motion. The sound did not belong here. He stepped outside, wiping grease from his fingers, and squinted into the sunlight. A dark, luxury SUV rolled slowly to a stop in front of his garage. Its surface reflected light like glass, untouched by dust or time. For a moment, Marcus thought the driver must be lost. Then, the back door opened. A young girl stepped out slowly. Her movement was careful, measured, almost calculated. Thick metal braces wrapped both of her legs, from thigh to ankle. Every step looked heavy, painful, controlled. She looked no older than 19. Her face was pale yet calm, framed by soft brown hair tied back neatly. Her eyes held exhaustion, but also an awareness, the kind that comes from years of struggle. She leaned against the door for balance, breathing carefully. Then another woman stepped out. Tall, confident, perfectly dressed. Marcus recognized her immediately. Alina Ward, a real estate billionaire known across Texas. Her name was stamped on skyscrapers, entire districts, and business headlines. And now, she stood in front of his dusty garage like someone who had nowhere else to go. Alina scanned the area, clearly unsure. Her eyes passed over the peeling paint, rusted doors, and old tools. She looked uncomfortable, but determined. "Our car overheated on the highway," she said. The driver insisted this was the nearest place. Marcus nodded slowly. "I can take a look." As he opened the hood, his eyes kept drifting back to the girl. The braces were bulky, heavy, wrong. His chest tightened. Marcus had spent his whole life understanding how things move. Gears, joints, pressure, balance, and what he saw made no sense. The girl sat on a metal bench outside. She didn't complain. She didn't shift. She sat still, like someone used to pain. Marcus closed the hood and hesitated. Then, he walked toward her. "Can I ask you something?" he said gently. She looked up, surprised. Most people avoided eye contact. "Do those braces usually feel that tight?" Her eyes widened. No one had ever asked her that. "They hurt," she said quietly. "Especially when I stand." Alina stiffened. "They were custom-made by the best specialists." Marcus nodded. "I believe that." The girl swallowed. "I was paralyzed when I was 8. After an accident, doctors said walking without support was unlikely." Alina exhaled heavily. "We tried everything. Surgeries, therapy, devices. This is the best solution they offered." Marcus knelt down slowly, keeping his hands visible. "Would you mind if I look closer? I won't touch anything without permission." The girl glanced at her mother, then nodded. Marcus studied the braces like a mechanic studies a broken engine. The joints were stiff. The weight distribution was uneven. Pressure points were placed wrong. His brow furrowed. "These are built wrong," he said quietly. Alina straightened instantly. "What did you say?" "I'm not questioning the doctors," Marcus replied calmly. "But whoever designed these focused on appearance, not function. They didn't understand movement." The girl held her breath. "You'd think they're the problem." Marcus nodded. "I do." Elena's voice sharpened. "You're a mechanic." "Yes, ma'am, and you believe you know more than medical engineers." "I know metal," Marcus said. "I know joints, I know pressure, and I know when something is built to fail." Silence filled the air. "I'm not promising miracles," he added. "I won't charge you anything. I just think I can make them better." Alina looked torn, fear battling desperation in her eyes. Then the girl spoke. "Mom, please." That single word broke the tension. Alina nodded slowly. "I'll stay. I'll watch everything." "That's fair," Marcus replied softly. He carried the braces inside like fragile glass and laid them across his workbench. Anger burned in his chest, not at the people, but at the idea that even unlimited money could miss something so basic. He worked late into the night, sketching, dismantling, rebuilding. His hands ached, his eyes burned. But for the first time in years, Marcus Hale felt something dangerous. Hope, because if he was right, everything would change. What Marcus discovers inside the braces next will force the billionaire mother to question everything she trusted, and it will place Marcus in a situation he can never escape. Night fell, and Marcus locked the garage door from the inside. The world outside disappeared, leaving only the steady hum of the old ceiling fan and the occasional tick of cooling metal. He turned his attention to the leg braces laid out on his workbench. At first glance, they looked impressive. Polished, clean, perfectly symmetrical, almost beautiful, but Marcus knew better. He picked one up, feeling its weight in his hand. It was far heavier than it needed to be. That alone told him something was seriously wrong. He ran his fingers along the joints, bending them slightly. The movement was stiff, unnatural, like a door hinge rusted shut. These weren't designed to move with a human body. They were designed to control it. Marcus grabbed a wrench and carefully loosened one of the bolts. As the joints separated, his suspicions grew stronger. Inside, where there should have been flexible support, he found layers of metal stacked on top of each other. Every single added piece restricted motion. Every angle was designed to force pressure into exactly the wrong place. He shook his head slowly. Whoever built this had never spent a single moment watching someone struggle just to stand up. Hours bled into one another as Marcus dismantled the braces, piece by piece. With each discovery, his chest tightened. The knee joints were locked at slightly wrong angles, just enough to cause constant strain. The ankle supports were completely rigid when they should have been adaptive, moving with the foot. The straps themselves were positioned to hold a rigid shape, not to provide comfort. Every single design flaw explained the constant pain the young girl had been enduring. By midnight, his workbench was completely covered with parts. Marcus leaned back in his chair, wiping a bead of sweat from his forehead, and just stared at the mess. This wasn't a case of medical complexity. This was just poor, lazy engineering, hidden behind an expensive brand name and a fancy logo. He pulled out a worn notebook, its pages yellowed and filled with his old sketches of engines, suspensions, and complex joint mechanisms. He flipped to a blank page and began to draw. New joints, lighter materials, better angles. He envisioned systems that would allow movement, that would encourage it, instead of resisting it at every turn. By the time dawn broke, his hands were black with grease and his eyes were burning from lack of sleep. But the design was finally clear in his mind. The next morning, sunlight spilled into the garage as Alina and her daughter arrived. Marcus was already awake, already working. Alina stopped in the doorway, surprised to see him completely surrounded by scattered metal pieces, new sketches, and tools. She looked uncertain, almost afraid to ask the obvious question. "You didn't sleep?" she said, her voice quiet. Marcus managed a faint smile. "Not much." The girl moved closer, her eyes drawn to the sketches on the workbench. They widened in recognition. "Are those my braces?" "A new version," Marcus replied, not looking up from his work. "Something that actually works with you, not against you." Alina crossed her arms, her guard still up. "And you're sure this is safe?" "Safer than what she's wearing now," Marcus said gently, finally meeting her gaze. The girl leaned forward, fascinated by the drawings. "You understand them," she said, a hint of awe in her voice. "You understand them better than anyone has ever explained them to me before." Marcus nodded. "That's because I'm not looking at you as a patient. I'm looking at motion." That simple statement made her smile for the first time. Marcus began to explain his plan in simple, straightforward words. Lighter metal, flexible joints, pressure distributed evenly across the entire leg. Movement encouraged, not punished. He didn't use any big medical terms or confusing jargon. He spoke like someone explaining how to fix a bicycle. Alina listened quietly, watching his hands, his eyes. His focus was intense, but there was a humility to it. There was no pride in his voice, no sales pitch, no grand promises, just honesty. He began rebuilding. He shaped new pieces of aluminum, adjusted the flexibility of each joint, and tested every single movement by hand. He worked slowly, methodically, checking every detail twice, then 3 times. The garage filled with new sounds, the whir of a drill, the hiss of a sander, the careful rhythmic taps of a hammer on metal. Each noise carried a sense of purpose, of creation. The girl returned every day, sitting on a stool nearby, asking questions. Marcus answered every single one of them, making her feel like a part of the process, not just a subject. She told him stories about hospitals, about the endless white rooms, and the machines that beeped too loudly. She talked about doctors who spoke over her, as if she wasn't even there. Marcus listened to it all without interrupting, his hands never stopping their work. Alina watched from a distance, noticing how different this entire experience felt. There were no contracts to sign, no impossible deadlines, no pressure. There was just progress. By the 3rd day, the braces were unrecognizable. They were sleeker, lighter, more balanced. Marcus placed them on the bench and stepped back, his work complete. The girl gasped softly. "They look different. They feel different." Marcus said, "Trust me." Alina hesitated, a wave of fear creeping back into her eyes. What if this hurts her? Marcus met her gaze, his expression firm but kind. "Then we stop immediately." The girl nodded, her own determination shining through. "I want to try." Marcus helped her fit the new braces, carefully adjusting each strap. Her shoulders relaxed almost instantly. "They don't pinch," she said, her voice filled with surprise. "Good," Marcus replied. "That means the pressure is right." He guided her slowly, helping her to bend her knees, to shift her weight from one foot to the other. The braces responded smoothly, fluidly, as if they were listening to her body's intentions. Her breath caught in her throat. "It doesn't hurt." Alina covered her mouth, her own breath shaky. Marcus stepped back, giving them space. "Trust the support," he said softly. The girl placed her hands on her walker and pushed. She rose to her feet, not suddenly, not painfully, but in one smooth, fluid motion. Alina gasped, tears spilling freely down her cheeks. The girl stood straighter than she had in years, her eyes wide with shock and disbelief. "I'm standing." Marcus felt his own throat tighten. "Take it slow," he managed to say. She took one step, then another. Each movement was steady, controlled. And then she laughed. a sound so full of pure, unadulterated disbelief and joy that it echoed through the garage. Alina rushed forward, sobbing, wrapping her arms around her daughter. Marcus turned away, gripping the edge of the workbench to steady himself. His hands were shaking. This was more than he had ever imagined. After resting, the girl practiced more, walking back and forth across the garage, her confidence growing with every single step. Alina watched in silence, her entire world shifting on its axis. "You have no idea what you've done," she said quietly. She made a call she had been putting off for years, a call she dreaded but knew she had to make. She contacted the medical device company, the big corporation that had built the original braces. Her voice was a masterpiece of control. It was calm, professional, almost detached. She asked for the design specifications. She wanted to see the testing data. She requested the internal evaluations. "And they never told us," Elena continued, the words tumbling out now. "They told us the pain was normal. They said the struggle meant she was making progress. They made us believe her suffering was part of the healing." She looked straight at Marcus, her eyes burning with an intensity he'd never seen before. "You did in a few days what they could have, and should have, fixed in months, maybe even years." He had stumbled upon a fundamental flaw, a systemic failure that was likely affecting countless other children, other families who were being told the same lies. He hadn't just built a better brace. He had exposed a terrible secret. Alina took a deep breath, collecting herself. "I need you to understand something, Marcus. Powerful people, powerful companies, Now he mattered. Now, what he did had consequences beyond the walls of his garage. She walked right into the garage without her walker for the very first time. Each step was deliberate, careful, but it was free. It was hers. A huge proud grin spread across Marcus's face. "Look at you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. She beamed back at him, a smile that lit up the entire dusty space. "I feel like my legs belong to me again," she said. Elena stood by, watching them both, a mix of joy and apprehension swirling within her. She knew, with absolute certainty, that something irreversible had begun. That night, Marcus locked up the garage much later than usual. As he switched off the last of the lights, plunging the workshop into darkness, he saw it. A car, idling silently across the street, its headlights dimmed, just watching, waiting. He didn't run, he didn't hide. He just went home, a strange sense of calm settling over him. He knew tomorrow everything would be different. Because the very next morning, Marcus would receive an offer. An offer that could make him rich beyond his wildest imagination. Or, an offer that could destroy everything he had just fought so hard to create. The choice would be his. The next morning, the sun hadn't even fully risen when Marcus unlocked the heavy doors to his garage. He'd barely slept a wink, his mind a constant replay of yesterday's events. The image of the little girl's face, lit up with pure joy as she took her first unassisted steps, was seared into his memory. The sound of her laughter, a melody of freedom that echoed in the quiet workshop, contrasted sharply with the quiet fear he'd seen in her mother Elena's eyes for so long. He had just started to arrange his tools, the familiar clink of metal a comforting rhythm, when a sleek, black sedan glided to a stop across the street. It didn't pull up in front of the garage, just sat there, waiting, like a predator in the shadows. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Then, another car, just as polished and out of place, joined the first. Two men emerged. They were dressed in expensive, perfectly tailored suits that screamed corporate power, a stark contrast to the gritty, working-class neighborhood. Their shoes were immaculate, untouched by the oil and dust that coated everything else on the street. They walked with a certain kind of confidence, a swagger that said they owned, not just the pavement but the very ground beneath it. Marcus felt a cold knot form in his stomach. This wasn't a thank you visit. One of the men strode forward, a plastic smile on his face, extending a hand. Marcus ignored it, keeping his arms crossed over his chest. "We represent Northridge Medical Systems," the man said, his voice smooth and unnervingly calm. "The company that manufactured the original braces." Marcus's jaw tightened. "We'd like to have a word," the second man added, his eyes darting around the garage. "Preferably, somewhere private." Marcus gave a slow, deliberate nod. Inside, then, they stepped into the garage, their gazes sweeping over the organized chaos of tools and machinery with a thinly veiled air of judgment. "You have talent," the first man began, circling a half-finished engine block. "That's undeniable. What you managed to do. It was impressive." Marcus remained silent, letting the man's words hang in the air, like exhaust fumes. The corporate praise felt hollow, a prelude to the real reason they were here. "The company," the man continued, getting to the point, "would like to offer you a position. Head of our mechanical innovation department. You'd have unlimited resources, a full state-of-the-art laboratory, and a salary that would change your life forever." He paused, expecting a reaction, but Marcus's eyes remained steady, unlit by the promise of wealth. The second man stepped in, his tone a little sharper. "In exchange," he said, "you will sign a non-disclosure agreement, a contract stating that your modifications were experimental, unverified, and certainly not suitable for public use." The air in the garage grew thick, heavy with the unspoken threat. They wanted to bury the truth. They wanted to buy his creation and his silence, packaging it all as an internal innovation while discrediting his original work. "I won't do that," Marcus said, his voice quiet but firm. The two men exchanged a look, a flicker of annoyance crossing their composed faces. "Think about this very carefully, Mr. Evans," the first one warned. "An opportunity like this doesn't come around twice. We are offering you a future most people can only dream of." Marcus took a step closer, closing the distance between them. The smell of grease and metal on his clothes seemed to challenge their expensive cologne. "I already have work to do," he said, gesturing to the projects around him. The second man's voice hardened, dropping the pretense of a friendly offer. "Then you should be aware that continuing down this path, it could bring significant legal consequences. You are not a certified medical device manufacturer. You are not licensed." Marcus met his gaze without flinching. "I'm not harming anyone. I'm helping them." The men saw the resolve in his eyes. Without another word, they turned and left, their polished shoes finally crunching on the dusty gravel outside. The black sedans pulled away, disappearing as silently as they had arrived. Later that afternoon, Elena arrived with her daughter. The little girl ran ahead, her movements still a little clumsy, but filled with a newfound confidence that made Marcus's heart swell. But Elena's smile faded as she saw the look on Marcus's face. She sensed it immediately, the shift in the atmosphere, the lingering tension. "They came for you, didn't they?" she said, her voice barely a whisper. Marcus simply nodded. They tried to buy my silence. Elena's jaw tightened, a familiar fire of defiance in her eyes. I thought so, she murmured. The girl, sensing the serious tone, looked between the two adults, her brow furrowed with worry. Did I cause trouble? She asked, her small voice full of concern. Marcus knelt down, a genuine warm smile spreading across his face. No, he said gently, you didn't cause trouble. You caused truth. Elena placed a supportive hand on Marcus's shoulder. You need protection, Marcus, legal help. They won't just let this go. He looked up at her, his expression resolute. I don't need protection, he said. I need honesty. We need honesty. By evening, the story had already begun to spread. Not through the news or social media, but in the old-fashioned way, quietly, intentionally, from one person to another. Whispers in community centers, phone calls between desperate parents, conversations in waiting rooms. A mechanic, a miracle, a corporate failure, hidden by wealth and power. His phone started ringing, and it didn't stop. People started showing up at the garage. Parents carrying children, adults leaning on walkers, families whose hope had been worn thin by years of frustration and dead ends. They all came asking for help, their eyes filled with the same desperate hope he'd seen in Elena's. Marcus worked until his hands ached and his muscles screamed in protest. He fixed, he adjusted, he redesigned, fueled by coffee and a burning sense of purpose. He knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that there was no going back. The line had been drawn. He was no longer just a mechanic fixing cars. He was a beacon of hope for those the system had forgotten. But this was just the beginning. The calm before the inevitable storm. Because when the first official lawsuit threat arrives, a certified letter filled with legal jargon and intimidation tactics, Marcus will be forced to make a choice. A choice between the safety of his quiet life and the dangerous, uncertain path of his newfound purpose. And this time, the decision he makes won't just affect him. He placed it on his workbench, a silent monument next to the scattered tools and half-finished projects. He didn't feel fear, not at first. He felt a strange sense of clarity, a finality. This was expected. This was always how it was going to end. He'd been sailing too close to the sun, and the Empire was striking back. He took a deep breath, the air thick with the smell of oil and metal, and went back to work. The quiet hum of his machinery was his only answer. By noon, the second warning came. This one was an official-looking notice, taped aggressively to the front door. Then his phone buzzed, an unknown number flashing on the screen. He let it ring, the sound a shrill intrusion into the sanctuary of his workshop. He didn't need to answer. He knew who it was, and he had nothing to say to them. His response was in the careful calibration of a joint, the delicate soldering of a circuit board. His response was in the hope he was building, piece by piece. When Elena came that afternoon, the tension in the air was palpable. She already knew. Her legal team, sharp and efficient, had alerted her the moment the corporation made its first move. She walked in, her heels clicking on the concrete floor, her expression a mixture of concern and defiance. They're trying to scare you, she said, her voice low. It's working, he replied with a raw honesty that was so characteristic of him. A young girl, the very reason for all this trouble, was there. She was practicing walking, her steps smoother and more confident with each passing day. Just weeks ago, she had been confined to a chair. Now, she moved with a newfound grace, a testament to Marcus's genius. She looked up, her bright eyes catching the somber mood. Are they angry because I can walk? She asked her innocent question, cutting through the legal jargon and corporate threats. Elena swallowed hard, her composure faltering for a moment. Elena insisted on hiring security. Guards, alarms, cameras. She wanted to turn the workshop into a fortress. But Marcus refused. He stood amidst the wreckage, a quiet resolve hardening in his eyes. "If I hide now," he said, his voice steady despite the chaos around him, "they win. This place is about hope, not fear." He began to pick up his tools, one by one, the simple act of restoring order, a small rebellion in itself. The next morning, as if summoned by the very forces of fate, a mother arrived. She held the hand of a small boy, whose legs were twisted by a rare condition, one the doctors had grimly declared would only worsen. They had no money, no powerful connections, only a desperate hope kindled by whispers of a man in a garage who performed miracles. The mother's eyes pleaded, telling a story of countless closed doors and shattered dreams. Marcus looked from the boy's hopeful face to the threatening letter still sitting on his workbench. A choice, a defining moment. He knelt, bringing himself to the boy's level, and the weariness in his own eyes was replaced by a gentle warmth. "I'll try," he said, and in those two words, he made his stand. He chose the boy. He chose hope. Late one night, the garage was quiet again. The crowds had gone home. The world outside was asleep. Marcus sat alone, the glow of a single lamp illuminating his workbench. He stared at his hands, the tools of his trade, the source of all his trouble and all his joy. He wondered how long they could keep going. How long before the pressure, the threats, the sheer exhaustion finally broke him. It was bigger than any corporation. He wasn't just fixing machines, he was restoring lives. Marcus woke up before the sun, but it wasn't fear that stirred him. It was a mind that simply refused to slow down. The garage felt different today, heavier, like it was holding its breath, a storm brewing within its walls. As he rolled open the heavy doors, he saw them. They were already waiting. A father, leaning on a pair of worn crutches, his face etched with worry. A woman, her hands firm on the back of a wheelchair, her posture a mixture of strength and exhaustion. A teenage boy, his gaze fixed on the ground, avoiding everyone's eyes. They all wore the same expression, a fragile cocktail of hope and desperation. Marcus took a slow, deep breath, the cool morning air filling his lungs, and he got to work. His method was simple, but profound. He listened before he touched anything. He understood that every creak, every malfunction, was part of a larger human story. He asked questions before he even thought about offering answers. He wanted to know about the pain, the frustration, the daily struggles. He never promised miracles, never guaranteed a perfect outcome. He only promised one thing, his full, unwavering effort. By mid-morning, the quiet street had transformed. A small crowd had gathered across the road, a silent audience to the day's unfolding drama. Phones were raised, not intrusively, but quietly, recording, sharing, whispering. The digital world was taking notice of the small garage in the quiet neighborhood. Alina arrived just before noon. Her face was a mask of calm, but her eyes were alert, scanning everything. She'd been on the phone all morning, a whirlwind of activity. She had called journalists, doctors, advocates, anyone who would listen. She was building a different kind of wall, one of words and support. "If they're going to attack you," she said, her voice steady, "they'll do it out in the open." Marcus just nodded, a silent agreement passing between them. Then so will we. It didn't take long. The first reporter showed up shortly after, a local news channel, drawn by the buzz. They were cautious, their questions simple and direct. Why are you doing this? Are you a licensed professional? Do you fear the consequences? Marcus answered each question with a disarming honesty. I'm good at fixing problems, he said, looking straight into the camera. People were in pain, and I knew I could help, so I did. The simplicity of his motive was powerful. That single news report was like a match to dry tinder. The story spread faster than anyone could have imagined. By evening, national outlets were calling. Their interest peaked. The giant, Northridge Medical Systems, was forced to respond. They released a formal statement, dripping with corporate jargon and veiled threats. They called Marcus's work unsafe, unverified, and dangerous. They tried to paint him as a reckless charlatan, a danger to the very people he was trying to help. But Elena was ready. She responded publicly, standing right beside Marcus, her daughter walking freely, confidently, in the background. The image was more powerful than any press release. My child suffered for years because of their approved designs, Elena declared, her voice ringing with conviction. This man listened when no one else would. He cared when a corporation saw only a statistic. The internet exploded. A tidal wave of support poured in from every corner of the globe. But with the praise came the threats. The inbox was flooded with emails. The phone rang off the hook. Letters arrived, some filled with heartfelt gratitude, others with chilling warnings. The battle lines were being drawn, not in a boardroom, but in public opinion. That night, as darkness fell, Marcus's garage was surrounded. But it wasn't a mob of protesters. It was a silent, protective circle. Neighbors with thermoses of coffee. Volunteers he'd never met. The families he had helped. Standing shoulder to shoulder, they formed a human wall, a quiet, resolute barricade against the unknown. Marcus watched from inside, the sheer scale of the support overwhelming him. Elena's daughter, the girl whose life he had changed, came and stood beside him. She looked at the crowd, then at him. You're not alone, she said, her voice soft but certain. And in that moment, he believed her. He knew this was just the beginning. The corporation's next move wouldn't be a public statement or a legal filing. It would be something darker, something that no amount of truth or public support could easily stop. A new kind of danger was coming, and he would have to face it. But looking out at the faces in the crowd, he knew he wouldn't be facing it alone. This was no longer just about fixing machines. It was about fixing a broken system. And that was a fight worth having. The first sign something was wrong came with the silence. No cars passed the garage that morning, no voices, no footsteps. The street felt completely empty, like the city had just forgotten this place even existed. I noticed it the moment I unlocked the door, the air thick with an unnatural quiet. Elena arrived shortly after, and I could see it in her eyes too. They scanned the street, slowly, methodically. Something feels off, she said, her voice barely a whisper. Before I could even respond, a deafening crash echoed from deep inside the garage. One of the heavy metal shelves had collapsed, sending tools scattering across the concrete floor like shrapnel. In that same instant, the power shut off. Complete, suffocating darkness swallowed the room. Stay still, Elena whispered, her hand finding my arm in the blackness. I instinctively reached for my phone, pulling it out, but the screen showed what I already knew. No signal. Then, from outside, came the sound of footsteps. They were slow, deliberate, each one a hammer blow against the silence. Someone was there. Someone was watching. I stepped forward, putting myself between Elena and whatever was coming. My heart was pounding against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat, but I forced my voice to stay calm. Even as his private property, I called out into the street. You need to leave. Now a shadow moved past the main garage window, a fleeting shape against the dim morning light. Then another. We held our breath, waiting. Nothing happened for several long, agonizing seconds. Then, a rock smashed through the glass, showering the floor with glittering shards. Elena gasped and pulled me closer, her fear a tangible thing in the dark. But I didn't run. I couldn't. I walked forward, my hand finding the heavy-duty flashlight we kept by the door. I grabbed it, thumbed the switch, and blasted a beam of bright white light through the broken window. The shadows vanished. They were gone as quickly as they had appeared. The police arrived a few minutes later, called by neighbors who heard the crash. They took a report, looked around, but there was nothing to find. No one was caught. No names, no faces. But the message was crystal clear. We were being watched, and they were closing in. That night, Elena insisted we leave the garage for good. We can't stay here, Marcus. It's not safe. She took us to a secure location, a place I'd never seen before. It had guards, cameras, bright lights flooding every corner. I hated it. It felt like a cage. But I agreed. This was no longer just about pressure or intimidation. This was about real, physical danger. The next day, Northridge released another public statement, a carefully worded piece of corporate spin, distancing themselves from any wrongdoing, while privately denying any involvement in the unfortunate incident at our garage. But the public wasn't buying it. Not anymore. The tide was turning. Support for our cause grew louder than ever. Donations started pouring in. Lawyers from top firms volunteered their time. Pro bono engineers from competing companies reached out, offering to analyze our data and validate our findings. In that moment, watching the wave of support build, I realized something important. Their fear tactics had failed. They had tried to scare us into silence, but all they did was make our voices louder. And that's when the corporation changed its strategy. They understood that threats and force weren't going to work, because the next thing they tried wouldn't involve shattered glass or shadowy figures in the street. It would be something far more insidious, far more dangerous. It would be a lie. A single, perfectly crafted lie, designed to do what brute force couldn't: erase my reputation, discredit our work, and turn the entire world against us forever. And it almost worked. It all started quietly, almost invisibly. A single article, posted late at night, a digital whisper in the dark. It questioned Marcus's background, digging into his education, or lack thereof. It questioned his right to even touch medical equipment. The headline was carefully worded, but its sharpness was unmistakable. And that was just the beginning. Within hours, more articles followed, like a contagion spreading through the network. Anonymous sources popped up, their faces hidden, their claims unverified. A former mechanic, suddenly an expert, accused Marcus of conducting dangerous, reckless experiments. The narrative was being built, brick by malicious brick. Marcus woke up the next morning to a storm. His phone was a torrent of notifications, hundreds of messages flooding his inbox. Some were supportive, voices of encouragement trying to break through the noise. But many others were filled with doubt, with fear, with accusation. The seeds of mistrust had been planted, and they were sprouting at an alarming rate. Alina, ever his steadfast anchor, read the articles in complete silence. I watched her face, her jaw tightening with each line, her knuckles white as she gripped her tablet. Finally, she looked up, her eyes blazing with a cold fire. "They're rewriting the story," she said, her voice low and tense. "They're trying to erase everything you've done." And she was right. By noon, the whispers had grown into a roar. A new rumor began to circulate, a vicious, calculated lie. It claimed that one of Marcus's devices had failed, that it had catastrophically malfunctioned and injured a patient. It was utterly, completely false. But in the world we live in, fear travels so much faster than truth. The impact was immediate and devastating. Families who had placed their hopes in Marcus began to hesitate. Appointments were canceled, one after another. The clinic's phones, which usually rang off the hook, fell eerily silent. It was a suffocating quiet, a void where hope used to be. I saw the weight of it all settle onto Marcus. It was a physical burden, visible in the slump of his shoulders, in the way he stared out the window at nothing. This was so much worse than the physical threats he had faced before. This wasn't an attack on his body, it was an assault on the very foundation of his work: trust. When you take away trust, you take away everything. Just as the despair felt like it was about to swallow us whole, a small figure appeared in the doorway. It was the girl, the one whose life he had changed so completely. She walked in that afternoon, completely unaided. Her steps weren't hesitant or shaky. They were strong, sure, and filled with a quiet power. Her presence was undeniable, a living, breathing refutation of every lie being spread. She looked at Marcus, then at Alina, and her voice, though soft, was filled with unshakable resolve. "Let me speak," she said. It wasn't a request. It was a command. A press conference was arranged in a hurry. The room was packed with reporters, their cameras like a firing squad, their faces a mixture of skepticism and morbid curiosity. This time, Alina stood back, fading into the crowd. She knew, as did I, that this wasn't her fight to lead. This time, the truth itself had to walk forward. And it did. The girl walked onto the stage. She spoke calmly, her voice clear and steady, reaching every corner of the room. She didn't need a script. She didn't need any dramatic embellishments. She simply shared her journey. She spoke of the years of pain, the feeling of being trapped in her own body. She described her progress, the small victories that became a landslide of freedom. And then, she walked across the stage, from one end to the other and back again. There was no exaggeration. There was no performance. It was just reality, raw and irrefutable. You could feel the atmosphere in the room shift. The lie, so carefully constructed, so viciously spread, began to crack under the simple weight of the truth. The effect was instantaneous. The tide of public opinion turned. Support for Marcus returned, not as a trickle, but as a flood, stronger and more passionate than before. People weren't just defending a man anymore. They were defending hope. They were defending the possibility of a better future. Faced with this overwhelming wave of public support, Northridge had no choice. They quietly withdrew their claims, issuing a sterile, faceless retraction that was buried on page 12. Marcus's reputation, though battered and bruised, had survived. The immediate threat was over. But we all knew this wasn't the end. The battle was far from over, because the final confrontation wouldn't be fought in courtrooms or through press releases. It wouldn't be about lawsuits or media spin. It would be about something much more fundamental. It would be about choice, and about the future. Now Marcus stands at a crossroads, a decision weighing on him heavier than any corporate attack. He has to decide whether to accept the world as it is, or to refuse its limitations and continue fighting for the world as it could be, and that choice will define everything. The noise faded slowly. After weeks of relentless attention, arguments, lies, and fear, the world finally grew quiet again. The crowds that had gathered, hungry for a spectacle, began to thin. The cameras, once a constant, intrusive presence, packed up and left. The street outside Marcus's workshop, which had been a chaotic stage for news, vans, and protesters, returned to its familiar stillness. Inside the garage, Marcus stood alone, the silence a stark contrast to the recent turmoil. He found himself staring at the workbench, the very spot where this whole incredible, terrifying journey had begun. The tools, his trusted extensions, were worn from countless hours of labor. The concrete floor was a mosaic of oil stains and scuff marks, each a memory of a project completed. The walls, covered in old calendars and faded diagrams, were unchanged, but he was not the same man who had first picked up a wrench in this space. The world had seen him, judged him, and ultimately, left him to pick up the pieces. He was tired, but underneath the exhaustion, something new was taking root. Elena arrived late that evening, the setting sun casting long shadows across the quiet street. She didn't bring a team of lawyers or a security detail this time. It was just her, stepping out of her car and walking towards the open garage door with a purpose that felt different from their previous encounters. She stood in the doorway for a moment, her gaze taking in the humble workshop. "They've backed down," she said, her voice clear and steady. "Their board is restructuring. After the public backlash, they won't touch you again." Marcus nodded, a wave of relief washing over him, so profound it almost buckled his knees. The weight he'd been carrying for weeks finally lifted, but it left him feeling hollowed out, drained. He had won, but the victory felt strangely empty. "There's more," Elena continued, stepping further into the garage. She stopped a few feet from him, her expression unreadable in the dimming light. "They want to offer you something. Quietly, of course, a position. Head of a new research division. Complete control over your projects. Unlimited funding. Total freedom to create." The offer hung in the air between the mug golden cage. The very thing he had fought against, now being handed to him on a silver platter. Marcus didn't answer right away. His gaze drifted past her, through the open door, to the world outside. He saw the young girl, the one who had started it all, practicing walking on the sidewalk in the fading light. Each step she took with her new prosthetics was more solid than the last, strong, confident, free, a living testament to what was possible when technology served humanity, not a bottom line. He turned his eyes back to Elena. "I can't work for them," he said finally, the words tasting like truth. "Not after what they did. Not after how they tried to twist this into something it wasn't." A soft smile touched Elena's lips, a genuine one that reached her eyes. "I hoped you'd say that," she said. She reached into the leather satchel she carried and pulled out a simple manila folder. It wasn't thick with legal jargon or corporate letterhead. She handed it to him. He opened it. It wasn't a contract. It was a plan. Detailed blueprints, funding proposals, mission statements. The title at the top read, "The Phoenix Center for Rehabilitation Engineering." Independently funded, she explained, by a consortium of anonymous donors she had quietly assembled. Supported by a network of ethical medical professionals. No corporate control, no profit motives, just a simple, powerful mission, to build devices for people, not for profit. "Your garage can become something bigger," Elena said, her voice filled with a quiet passion, "a real force for good. Only if you want it." Marcus felt a familiar tightness in his chest, but this time it wasn't anxiety or fear. It was something else, a burgeoning sense of purpose, of hope. This was never about fame or money for him. It was always about the small, profound moments. Moments like watching a young girl reclaim her life, one confident step at a time. It was about seeing the light return to a family's eyes. He looked from the plans in his hands to the girl outside, now laughing as she jogged a few steps. He nodded slowly, a decision solidifying in his heart. "Then let's build it," he said. "Let's build it right." Months later, the doors of the Phoenix Center opened. It wasn't a sterile hospital or an impersonal factory. It was a place filled with light, the scent of machine oil and fresh paint, and the vibrant hum of people working together. Families traveled from all over the country, from all over the world. Children who dreamed of running, adults who wanted to hold a tool again, veterans seeking to reclaim a piece of themselves. Workers injured on the job but not broken in spirit. Marcus's approach was different. He listened first, his calloused hands resting on the table as he heard their stories, their hopes, their frustrations. He worked second, his mind racing to solve problems that corporate R&D had deemed unprofitable. He promised nothing except his unwavering effort and his whole heart. The girl, the one who started it all, was a constant presence at the center. She volunteered often, her own journey, a beacon of hope for newcomers. She would walk with them, talk with them, and show them, through her own bright example, what was truly possible. One evening, as the sun set in a blaze of orange and purple, she walked beside Marcus along the path that wound through the center's small garden. She moved with an easy grace, no braces, no hesitation, no fear. She stopped and looked at him, her eyes shining with a wisdom beyond her years. "You gave me more than my legs back," she said, her voice soft but sure. "You gave me a direction, a purpose." Marcus smiled, a genuine, unburdened smile. "You found that all by yourself," he replied. "I just helped with the hardware." They stood there together, watching the horizon fade from day to night. A humble mechanic who just wanted to help. A powerful mother who used her influence for good. A young woman who refused to let her circumstances define her. Their lives had crossed by chance but were now bound together by a deliberate choice to build something better. And in that quiet, perfect moment, as the first stars began to appear in the twilight sky, Marcus understood something simple and true. Real hope doesn't come from power or wealth or corporate boardrooms. It comes from ordinary hands, reaching out, willing to care. It's built, piece by piece, in garages and workshops, by people who believe in a better world and are brave enough to try and build it. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel for more content that celebrates the power of the human spirit. We'll see you in the next one.